Paris, May 1925. A man in a government car pulls up to the Hôtel de Crillon, one of the finest addresses in the city. He is carrying official-looking documents, a briefcase, and a name that isn't his. Within 2 weeks, he will have sold a landmark he doesn't own to a man who will never go to the police, and he will do the whole thing a second time before leaving France entirely. His name, one of his names, was Victor Lustig, and this is where the money went. To understand the Eiffel Tower sale, you first have to understand who Victor Lustig actually was, which is genuinely difficult because almost every fact about him comes layered in a persona he constructed himself. He was born in 1890 in Hostinec, a small Bohemian town that is now part of the Czech Republic. His birth name was documented as Victor Lustig. By the time American federal agents eventually caught up with him decades later, they had catalogued 47 aliases. 47. The Bureau's file on him ran to hundreds of pages. What the record confirms is this. Lustig was a polyglot. He spoke 5 languages fluently: Czech, German, French, English, and Italian. And he used each one to present a different version of himself. On transatlantic ocean liners, which were his preferred hunting ground in the early 1920s, he cultivated wealthy passengers over the course of a voyage, building trust across days of shared meals and card games before introducing what he called the money box, a device he claimed could chemically duplicate currency. He would sell the box for tens of thousands of dollars. By the time the buyer discovered it produced nothing but blank paper, Lustig was already at sea again. The money from those early cons is largely untraceable. Cash transactions, no banks, no receipts. It funded what came next. The specific idea for the Eiffel Tower sale came, as many of the best cons do, from a genuine news story. In the spring of 1925, Lustig was in Paris, almost certainly running low on operating capital. He was reading the newspapers, which was a professional habit, and he found what he needed in a small item reporting that the Eiffel Tower was in a serious state of disrepair. The original structure had been built as a temporary installation for the 1889 World's Fair. It was never intended to be permanent. By the 1920s, maintenance costs were substantial, and there was genuine public debate about its future. Lustig understood immediately. The story gave him a plausible premise. The French government might actually sell the tower for scrap metal. That wasn't absurd. It wasn't even particularly far-fetched to a businessman who didn't follow Parisian politics closely. So he did what any serious operator does before a major transaction. He prepared documentation. Using a forger whose identity has never been definitively established, Lustig had official-looking stationery produced with the letterhead of the French Ministry of Posts, which was the government body responsible for the tower at the time. He gave himself the title Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts. The documents looked real because they were designed by someone who understood what real documents looked like. That investment in production quality would prove essential. Lustig sent letters, on ministry stationery, to 6 of Paris's largest scrap metal dealers. The letter was formal, confidential, and urgent. It invited them to a private meeting at the Hôtel de Crillon to discuss a significant government contract. The Hôtel de Crillon, for context, sits on the Place de la Concorde. Holding a government meeting there was entirely plausible. It was the kind of place where serious transactions happened. 5 of the 6 dealers showed up. Lustig arrived by official-looking car, impeccably dressed, projecting the particular exhausted competence of a senior civil servant managing a sensitive situation. He told them the following. The French government had made a decision, quietly, to demolish the Eiffel Tower. Maintenance costs were unsustainable. The political situation around announcing this publicly was delicate. Parisians had developed an attachment to the structure, and so the tender process had to be conducted in complete secrecy. The winning dealer would receive 12,000 tons of scrap iron. He asked them each to submit a confidential bid. He then did something tactically precise. He took the group on a personal tour of the tower itself, a government official escorting potential contractors to inspect what they were bidding on. Completely normal. The dealers climbed the tower with him, assessed the iron, asked technical questions. Lustig answered them. Several accounts, recorded later, suggest the tour made the whole arrangement feel unquestionably real. The bids came in, and Lustig picked his mark. The man Lustig chose was named André Poisson. The name appears in FBI records and in the later accounts of Lustig's associates, though some details of Poisson's background remain thin in the historical record. What we know is this: Poisson was relatively new to Paris business circles, anxious to establish himself, and, crucially, slightly suspicious of the deal. Poisson's wife, by some contemporary accounts, had doubts. She thought something felt off. Lustig sensed the hesitation and made a move that is, frankly, a work of dark craft. He called Poisson in for a private follow-up meeting and confided in him, man to man, official to trusted contractor, that his government salary was, shall we say, insufficient. He was looking for a small personal consideration, a bribe. Think about that for a moment. Poisson had been worried the deal was too clean to be real. Lustig made it corrupt. And corruption, in Poisson's experience, was how French government contracting actually worked. The bribe made the whole thing credible. Poisson paid. The documented figure, according to FBI records and the subsequent investigation, was approximately 70,000 francs, equivalent in 1925 purchasing power, to somewhere between 50 and 100,000 US dollars, though precise conversion across a century is inexact. That amount covered the purchase price for the tower's scrap rights, plus the personal consideration Lustig had requested. Lustig took the money, the cashier's check, and himself to Vienna within days. Here is the part of this story that matters as much as the con itself. André Poisson never went to the police. Lustig knew he wouldn't. That was built into the selection process. A man who pays a bribe to a government official to secure a contract cannot then walk into a police station and explain that the bribe was part of a fraud. The story unravels him along with the con man. Lustig from Vienna watched the French newspapers. He waited for any report, any investigation, any indication that Poisson had gone public. There was nothing, just as he had calculated. And that is when he went back to Paris and did it again. The second sale, roughly 1 month after the first, followed the same structure almost exactly. New stationery, new set of dealers, new tour. This time, the mark grew suspicious sooner and did go to the police. Lustig was already gone, but the investigation created a public record. And it was that record, reported in the press, that finally made the first sale publicly known as well. Poisson, it appears, never fully confirmed his role. His silence, which was protective of his own reputation, also meant that the exact amount he paid was reconstructed from secondary sources, rather than his direct testimony. Contemporary researchers and historians, working from FBI files and French police records, converge on figures in the range described, but the precise number should be understood as well-documented estimation, not a certified account balance. The money from the first sale, Lustig had it, in cash, in Vienna, and he spent it. Lustig used Vienna as a staging point and eventually moved his operation to the United States, where he would spend the 1930s running a series of increasingly high-stakes cons before the machinery of American federal law finally caught him. One episode from this period has become famous, though it exists at the edge of documented fact and needs to be labeled clearly as such. According to accounts relayed through FBI records and the memoirs of people who knew Lustig, he once successfully conned Al Capone. The story goes like this. Lustig approached Capone in Chicago, this would have been around 1930, with an investment scheme. Capone gave him $50,000. Lustig sat on the money for 2 months, investing nothing, then returned the full amount to Capone and explained that the deal had fallen through. Capone, reportedly impressed by the honesty, gave him $5,000 as a reward. Lustig had, in effect, borrowed $50,000 interest-free from one of the most dangerous men in America and walked away with $5,000 in profit. This story appears in multiple accounts and was reportedly acknowledged in some form in FBI files. However, it does not appear in Capone's own documented record. It should be understood as a well-circulated account that federal investigators found credible, not a confirmed transaction. What is documented without question, Lustig continued to run the money box scheme across the United States throughout the late 1920s and early 30s. He collected tens of thousands of dollars from marks in multiple states. The money moved fast. Hotels, tailors, travel, no banks, no paper. By the early 1930s, Lustig had shifted into something far more dangerous than confidence work. He was manufacturing counterfeit currency. This is documented in detail in Secret Service records. Lustig ran what federal investigators later described as one of the most sophisticated counterfeiting operations in American history, up to that point. He was not printing the notes himself, he had a printer, a man named William Watts. But Lustig was the distributor and the organizer. The notes were high quality, they circulated. The Secret Service had been tracking him for years, and in May of 1935, they finally arrested him in New York City. He escaped, briefly, notoriously, from the Federal Detention Center in New York by climbing out a window using bedsheets, which he had done in stages over several days while posing as a window cleaner to avoid suspicion. He was recaptured roughly a month later in Pittsburgh. His trial, in federal court in 1935, resulted in conviction on counterfeiting charges and on charges related to his earlier fraud operations. He was sentenced to 20 years in Alcatraz. He died at Springfield Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in 1947 of pneumonia, while still serving that sentence. He was 57 years old. So the question this channel exists to answer: where did the money go? Let's be precise about what we know and what we don't. The proceeds from the 2 Eiffel Tower sales, principally the first, Poisson's payment, were converted to cash and moved to Vienna within days of the transaction. From there, they funded Lustig's operating expenses: travel, lodging, the production of new fraudulent materials, bribes to avoid arrest in multiple jurisdictions. Confidence men of this era did not invest, they consumed. Cash was operational capital, and it was spent at the speed it was earned. The proceeds from the ocean liner moneybox cons, estimated by investigators at the time to run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars across his career, followed the same pattern. No bank accounts in his real name have ever surfaced in any jurisdiction. No property. No investments. The man left no estate. The counterfeiting operation is a partial exception. Federal investigators did recover some materials and tracked some of the counterfeit notes back through the distribution chain. But the profits Lustig derived from that operation, his cut from the notes William Watts printed, were again dispersed as cash, and the record ends there. What the FBI property inventory recorded at the time of his final arrest in 1935 is almost poignant in its smallness. A quantity of cash, personal clothing, and the tools of his trade. No fortune, no nest egg, no Swiss account revealed decades later. The money Lustig took from people did not accumulate, it circulated. He was a man who moved money the way water moves through sand. Thoroughly, quickly, and without leaving much trace of the direction it went.